Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome from the commercial break. Some of us have spent much longer than those of you who just turned in this morning. We've been here over the last 2 days at the Regulators Forum, and I must say it was a very well attended forum, and the issues discussed were extremely very technical, informative, and enlightening. And I've been coming to the IIC for, I think, 3-4 years now. I'm losing count. And when I came here the first time, I met with a colleague here, and I set myself a goal that over the period, I was going to try and do two things. First, lose some weight, and secondly, slow down the growing process. I'm pleased to announce today that I have failed in both endeavors. This morning's discussion was extremely interesting, and what I picked out from that significantly was a point made by Carlos between the comparison between the EU and the US, to the extent that the EU is lagging behind the US. I know there was that discussion about using averages and whether we should be comparing countries with countries. But I think the general thinking in the EU is that you're lagging behind the US in terms of the might of telecom operators. And for that reason, we're beginning to see a lot more consolidation in the EU market. And I think the most significant one to date was the acquisition of impasse by Telefonica, an 8.6 billion euro acquisition that got approved. Now, in 2012, Austria had its own consolidation, and then that was followed by Ireland recently as well. And you're getting the sense that that's the flavor of the climate right now, and consolidation is what we're going to be seeing a lot of. There are discussions in France, Italy, and I'm sure sooner than later we're going to hear another major consolidation. Over the last 2 days of the forum, we had the opportunity to look at various aspects of this. One topic dealt with competition and consolidation, and the another one dealt with public interest. Thankfully, this morning we're going to try and marry the two. And we're going to look at issues about consolidation and competition, and whether that is in the public interest, it achieves the common good of society. I have a distinguished panel of speakers with me this morning, and I'll just quickly introduce them. And to the extreme end, I have Chris Wagner from Morrison & Foerster, and next to him, another Chris Hutchins from Liberty Global. Next to Chris is Gabriel from Alcatel-Lucent, and then Sophie Moonen, and finally Michael Zangworth. Michael is Austrian, by the way, and he just confessed to me that this is the first time coming to this palace. So, with that said, I think we'll just delve straight into the presentations, and I have the pleasure of calling on Sophie to give us the first presentation. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to address such a distinguished audience. I have to say that I found the discussion in the first panel very stimulating. So what I will propose to do in my presentation is to cover, to give you an overview of the types of mergers that in the telecom sectors that the European Commission has had to review in the past years. And actually, it's not just the European Commission. Some national competition authorities are also reviewing similar deals, depending on whether, who has jurisdiction over those deals. And then I will focus on the two main cases that have kept us quite busy in the past years, which were the two mobile mergers in Ireland and Germany, and trying to identify from that some general lessons on how the Commission, deals with mobile telecoms mergers. This would tie in with some of the broader themes that have been touched upon in the first panel, namely, we are faced with national markets, and there, in this context, as a competition enforcer, it's a different position than a regulator, which, looks at what can be achieved and what are the policy goals and trying to change things ex ante, where we are. Merger control is prospective, but we still take the markets as they are, where, with the market realities, the positions of the players, and we have to try and assess, what is the likely impact on a merger for specific sets of customers. And, in doing so, we try to reconcile the objectives and making sure that, consumers after the merger will not be worse off and will continue to enjoy the benefits that competition brings in terms of innovation, good quality services and innovative services at affordable prices. And also, the other debate of, is consolidation needed for investment? So moving to the first slide, just in terms of consolidation trends, we, as I mentioned, we're very busy, and I think this is, this current trend of consolidation we expect will continue. We've reviewed many mergers, and there are different types of merger, that are driven by different deal rationales, and they range from the non-problematic to the more problematic. I mean, as regards the current wave of mobile telecoms mergers, the industry argues that consolidation is necessary to allow operators to achieve scale, and that in turn, will allow them to invest in new technologies. Consumer advocates would, on the other hand, consider that this is a dangerous trend and will lead, to less, higher prices and less innovative services. We have not really taken position in this debate, but we've examined each case on its merits because that's, the toolkit that we have. There are also other mergers that involve a mobile and cable business or another fixed business, and some can be seen in also the trend in some countries towards converged services, so bundles being offered, including fixed telephony, fixed broadband access, TV distribution, and mobile services, as well as also the need in the context of the rollout of the 4G LTE networks, the need for high-speed backhaul capacity. And finally, there are also mergers that are cable mergers, where, cable operator would expand its footprint in a given country. And as I said, telecoms market are still national. So we've also, considered the other dimension of this, which is the geography. So we've had cross-country deals, for instance, a merger, Telenor, Norwegian mobile operator, acquiring Bulgarian mobile operator, and this, needless to say, doesn't create many problems. Typically the transactions that are, that deserve the closest scrutiny and that are those that involve operators that are active in the same markets in the same country, as the recent mobile mergers, were. So these are, just a snapshot of the cases that the Commission has reviewed in the past 8 years. So we actually, these cases have generally seen operators, interestingly, reducing their geographic footprint and withdrawing from some markets, as you can see with Orange in the Netherlands or in the UK, or in Austria. UK was a joint venture, or Telefonica withdrawing from Ireland. And ultimately, the Commission has approved all of these mergers, in most cases subject to remedies, in first phase or in second phase. There is also one case, a 4-3 merger in the Netherlands that was cleared unconditionally after a first phase investigation. This case, just to, this would be a running theme in the presentation, but this case involved a struggling operator and that had been losing market share and that had not been particularly aggressive in terms of prices. And, therefore removing the constraint by that operator did not seem to, be problematic in terms of competition. And the Dutch market was also characterized by the presence of numerous MVNOs, and actually including some strong MVNOs, which were full MVNOs, and had a significant market share in some cases. So, what are the issues that we focus on? Market definition, it's typically not being a major issue because, as I said, the markets are national, remain national for the time being. Of course, going forward, if and when a single digital market materializes, there will be a different assessment to be made. And I have to say that operators themselves have never come forward to say that the market is broader for mobile telecom services. We've also examined, mobile versus non-mobile, what are the exact boundaries of this in some cases, examining the fixed to mobile substitution. But again, generally, we've always defined a single market for mobile telecom services. Nevertheless, and this will, be examined after, it's a differentiated market. It's a single market, but it's a differentiated market where, players position themselves and have different strategies and different strengths in different segments. For instance, the prepaid versus the postpaid, the business segment, mobile data and voice segment. So obviously, when it comes to the competitive assessment, it's a single market. Operators are present in all the segments, but the fact that their strength and their strategy vary depending on the segment is informative for what is the likely impact of the transaction. These have been gap cases, so-called gap cases. Telecoms markets are oligopolistic markets. There are few operators, generally. We've examined mergers from 5 to 4, now 4 to 3. It means, and these are characterized by high barriers to entry. There is limited spectrum. You need spectrum to operate. And because there are several operators to these mergers, up to this point, have not involved the creation of a dominant position. But nevertheless, our toolkit allows us to find that merger should not create should not lead to an impediment to effective competition, including, through non-coordination. So, in this respect, some factors are quite important. The closeness of competition between the companies themselves. How did they pre-merger constrain one another? What is the competition that is lost with the merger? Another factor is, does the merger involve players that, were important competitive forces and that therefore may have exerted, despite, what their market position might have been, sometimes, limited. Sometimes the mergers involve the smallest player, but they were able to, they had incentives to grow. They were quite coming to the market with innovative products and services at attractive prices, and therefore may have played a role on competition that's greater than their market share. The counterfactual, because of course, when assessing a merger, we called upon to compare the situation as it would have proceeded absent the merger with the situation that would result from the merger. And therefore, we called upon, for instance, to examine the rollout plans of the companies on a standalone basis and compare this, with their plans with the merger to check, for instance, in the context of efficiency claims, does the merger bring, additional efficiencies in terms of a better, faster rollout of a network? And, are the players struggling as they may claim? Or, what with their future absent the merger on a standalone basis? And for this, we actually look at, internal documents. We look at diversion ratios, usually using the proxy of the mobile number portability data. We look at market shares also at the segment level. We look at accounting data in terms of profitability to assess some, of the issues there. We also carry out a market investigation with other competitors and business customers, typically also involving regulators. And our chief economist team carries out detailed quantitative analysis using, the tools that they have. So, moving to the first merger that, we examined, in Ireland, this was the acquisition by the number 4 player of the number 2, that would have a combined market share of about 40%, and that would face, after the merger, the market leader, Vodafone, with a similar position of about 40%, and the incumbent fixed operator, Eircom. And a key specificity of the Irish market was the existence pre-merger of network sharing agreements. And this was related to the challenge in Ireland. Ireland, we learned, is characterized by a rural population and also not very densely populated in the west. And therefore, operators had concluded 2 distinct network sharing agreements to save costs and help them with the rollout of their networks. There was an agreement between O2 and Eircom, which was active sharing, and an agreement between Three and Vodafone, which was passive sharing. And the key notifying party claims were that Three and O2 target different customer groups. They have a different brand perception. Three brand perception being, as having a very poor network, and this is why you pay less for the service. That the merger would lead to large cost savings, and that both Three Ireland and O2, without the merger, would have been restrained in their ability to compete effectively. What the Commission found is that Three actually had been an important competitive force in the Irish market due to its need to grow its market share, and had been, one of the operators to roll out and come with innovative for instance, this all-you-can-eat data offer, and that then other operators had followed suit. We also found that the companies would have continued to invest and compete absent the merger. So Three had a continued commitment to customer growth on a standalone basis, and it was actually gaining market share. It was slow, but was continuing to gain market share. And that O2 remained a strong brand and would have been likely to make further investment, in particular in the context of its active network sharing with Eircom, because since it's active network sharing, these would have been a similar network. And the Commission's quantitative analysis, also in a merger simulation on the basis of UPP analysis, predicted significant price increase market-wide. Another theory of harm was that Eircom would be weakened because after the merger, of course, the merged entity's focus would be the integration of the 2 networks, and it was unclear what would have happened to its network sharing agreement, and this was a key piece in their ability to achieve full national coverage in Ireland. And the efficiencies that the party had brought forward were not proven to a large extent. And in this context, I think there's a difference between efficiencies that could be meant as synergies from the business sides and the efficiencies that, in our assessment, we're able to take into account as positive effects of the transaction that can outweigh possibly the competitive harm. And for this, they need to be verifiable, so they need to be materialized in this sufficiently certain way. They need also to be merger specific, so they need the merger to be achieved. And in this case, for instance, network sharing can offer also alternative, less anti-competitive means that, while preserving retail competition, allows operators to also save some of their costs. And the last factor is that these efficiencies need to be passed on to consumers, to the same consumers who would be harmed by the merger. And there, of course, when the efficiencies take largely the form of fixed cost savings, there are issues because typically it's marginal cost savings that are more likely to be passed on to consumers than fixed cost savings. So in Ireland, we did find some efficiencies, but they were of a modest nature, and they were not sufficient to outweigh the harm. And these were related to the national broadband scheme, where Three said that they would have decommissioned certain sites at the end of the national broadband scheme. It's a state aid scheme to cover Ireland, and that with the merger they would have kept them in operation. Coming to the German case, this was the acquisition of the number 3 player by the number 4 player, And it was also leading to 3 relatively similar market players in terms of market shares, depending on how you sliced it and depending on the segment. The notifying party claimed that the merged entity would offer improved quality network and become a stronger competitor to Vodafone and Deutsche Telekom for the high-value customers. In the low-value segment, that competition would be preserved mainly due to the large non-MNO, so segment operators in Germany, so like Freenet, Drillisch, and 1&1, which are service providers, and that there would be large synergies, mostly stemming from the network consolidation. What the Commission found is that E+ and O2 were close competitors with a focus on the prepaid customers at the lower end of the market, and that, on top of the loss of competition between E+ and O2, which would materialize with, higher prices in this lower end of the market, that both E+ and O2 were also important competitive forces, especially E+ at being, growing and bringing innovative, attractive plans. Again, competitors would likely follow the price increases, so the quantitative assessment found market-wide increases, not just by the merging parties, similar to Ireland, and that the efficiencies were not proven. And in particular, in Germany, there were no network sharing agreements. We reviewed, to what extent these would be a realistic, alternative to the merger, and with less anti-competitive effects. As you know, both cases were ultimately cleared with remedies. So. The remedies are mostly centered around entry by new players, which would be mobile virtual network operators, but based on an innovative capacity model. And these new MVNOs would commit to purchase upfront a significant capacity of the merged entities network, and for an upfront fee. So that means that contrary to a pay-as-you-go model for MVNOs, where the MVNO pays access fees based on its customers, per customer or per unit, and that therefore each new customer, involves an incremental cost. In this model, what this model, does is replicate more closely the type of cost structure that a mobile network operator has, which is a fixed cost structure, and therefore, the idea is that these entities would have the incentive to compete aggressively and replace the competitive constraint that would have been lost, through the merger. And the entity would also have access to the new technologies. It's of course evolving. The commitment is in place for 10 years, but now 4G is being rolled out. Within the next 10 years, you can expect that there would also be new technologies, and because you purchase the capacity, that means also there's a possibility to evolve as well if new technologies bring new capacity, and that also gives this is some future proofing, and it allows such MVNO without having to regulate prices and predict, how they evolve and how they can be competitive on the retail market based on their access condition. That means that they could, have some flexibility to offer retail products that are competitive. There's an option for the MVNO entrants to become mobile network operators in due course once they have acquired a sufficient network customer base, by acquiring spectrum from the merged entity. In Germany too, there will be auctions in the near future. In Ireland, that was not the case because there had just been an auction in November 2012, so most of the spectrum is allocated for a long period. And so there were other remedies which I will not, that are specific also to each market. So one related to the offer to prolong the network sharing agreement with Eircom, allowing Eircom, giving it the option to continue and to achieve its rollout plan. And in the case of Germany, to extend the contracts for MVNOs, the non-MNO operators. As as you can see, I mean, the variation of the remedies illustrate that, the specific facts of each case warrant, tailor-made remedies that, try to replace the competitive constraint that's lost through the merger. And they are, depending on the facts, whether there's an upcoming auction, what are the specific segments that are most affected by the merger. And as a matter of principle, the Commission, continues to have a preference for structural remedies in the mobile telecom sector. This would mean entry by a new mobile network operator. This being said, we also observe and respect the market reality, and we market test remedies. And if we also identify that there are some uncertainties as to the level of interest for our entry as a mobile network operator, there have been similarly effective remedies that could be considered. And this is what was done in this Irish and German case, and entry as an MVNO, and maybe at a later stage keeping the door open for a future evolution into a real full-fledged mobile network operator, including with network sharing, if that helps. So in terms of just not to try and exceed my allocated time, in terms of conclusions, I mean, we've looked at it because of the toolkit and the regulation we're enforcing. We have to do a case-by-case analysis, and this analysis also shows that there's no magic number. A case was cleared, a 4-3 merger in the Netherlands without conditions, and there were 5-4 mergers cleared with conditions. Markets can be fully analyzed by zooming in on different segments, and this is actually quite important. Even though it's a single market, it's quite important to look at the competitive interactions in different segments and the positioning of the players. So the Commission is indeed attentive to the closeness of competition of the merging parties, and is also attentive to the particular important role that the merging parties may have gained in the competitive dynamics. And although each case is reviewed based on specific facts, recurring issues are likely to arise in the context of future mobile telecom mergers. Useful experience has been, gained in the context of these cases, and I think we all expect that there will be more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. It was interesting hearing Sophie say she didn't want to exceed her time. I'm sure you're... well, we have 5 speakers, and we've got to do all of this within 1 hour, 45 minutes. So I'm going to call on Gabriel to do 10, maximum 12 minutes, so we can get everybody else to say something. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure for me to be here once again with you. And the few and short remarks I'm going to make are drawn from my experience as first an actor. I'm not a veteran like you are, Jürgen or Georg, but we were colleagues once as a regulator in Europe, but also as an observer today of what is happening around the world. Not only the US, EU, and I'm happy that Fabio mentioned the IDAT study. We helped IDAT get the necessary meetings to, being a Franco-American firm, we're a great observer of this EU-US constant comparison, but also of what's happening in the developing world, because a lot of what we think of to draw from our developed world experience does not apply in new countries. So just before I start, a few preliminary remarks drawn from these experiences to balance current dominant thinking I've been through since 1996. First, everything was best in EU because we were catching up, and in fact we did once catch up, but we forgot. So the grass is first thing is the grass is always greener on the other side of the Atlantic or on the other side of the sea. Second, time matters. There are investment cycles. And yes, the US has just gone through a great investment cycle, but is that not because Europe had before better copper, than the US had gone through 3G before the US had gone through 3G. So the US leapfrog from LTE to 2G to LTE. So we have to be careful of these two quickly drawn conclusions that always follow what we want to put into the heads of our governments and our regulators. And third is what is best in the end. It's a balance between the consumer's satisfaction, between the investment in the country, between, yes, the industry's health, between the capacity of an industry to export, and between the creations of the jobs in this sector in the country. So it's not, and what I've learned from being a public policymaker is that the public interest is not the sum, and it would be too easy if it was, the sum of the individual private interests. So, what we have learned in the past years is that there were various competition models around the world. I have tried to make a caricature. Some were based on two platforms, so-called two-platform countries. Mainly, let's say that's the US model. Competition, or so-called competition between cable and telecom. A few Nordic countries in Europe, because cable was strong in some countries and others. We didn't all have cable. And infrastructures were all in parallel and sometimes geographically overlapped, but led to debates. And they today lead to debates in the US. So what we tend to say, is the best model, is the US model. When you listen to Tom Wheeler, well, it's more balanced. There's a limit to geographical competition, great limit. And he's concerned with fostering more ultra broadband deployments. He's concerned that only, of course, 80% of the Americans have access to over 80 megabytes, but only 17.6% have the choice of their ultra broadband provider. Do we know this? And then we always say there are 3 or 4 major players. There's a great number and a big proportion of the American territory that relies on rural carriers. A lot of them with whom the big ones make alliances. So it's not that that the caricature that we have is not always the right one. Now, our one-platform countries. This has been the model for the past 10 years, mainly in France, UK, Italy, Spain, on copper, especially for the reasons who didn't enjoy strong cable competition, which our cable is catching up, which was a tendency, we have the tendency to debate that it fostered at once what we thought was innovation, investment. We had Asia, and I remember when I was a regulator, Koreans pouring. What is happening in France with you are the champion of triple play, cheap triple play, and we, in 3 years, got a boom in the broadband adoption. So this model once was efficient. Now, yes, we have a problem because we want to go to the next generation. So we shouldn't forget these are cycles, and what I call the zero platform countries, that means the fast developing countries, they look at our models and they say, well, it's a luxury in the biggest part of our territory to afford infrastructure or total infrastructure-based competition. It's a luxury that perhaps we can have in the denser cities, but for the biggest part of of our country, we cannot. And we're going to think to other models that combine infrastructure sharing, which is the buzzword, with competition, service competition, and active infrastructure competition. And I will draw on what is our industry heading towards in terms of technology that enable new models that bring back to the archaeology our debate on infrastructure versus service competitions. So mainly, well, this is an illustration of what I said. North America was the champion of unregulated broadband markets, yes, and proactive spectrum allocation. Latin America is much more balanced. A lot of countries, the debate is on open access backbones. They say we cannot afford to duplicate fiber backhauls, for instance. So from the start, we think, and Africa is very much the same, we cannot afford. So our topic is somewhere else is to attract investors, and you attract best investors on something that is shared, and then open it to competition, to foster innovation, and to accelerate rollout. And in the US, you have the debate about Google, fiber cities, about strong debate about municipalities being held by government to roll out broadband where the FCC and the population thinks it's lagging behind. In EMEA, then you have fragmented markets, we all know this. Difficult balance between a long debate between the active infrastructure competition on copper and the passive sharing and the platform competition between cable and telecom operators. And in Africa, in MER, open access backbones, other debates, on newer solutions. And now in Asia-Pac, you have some countries that the Chinese market is very much vertically integrated with dominant operators, but you have what I called sort of market shakeout in some countries that have undergone a little revolution in our sector, and that we know well, at Alcatel-Lucent, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. And the magic number of a country cannot afford more than 3 or 4 big operators. I would like the Singaporean regulator to tell us how many operators he has in a small state like Singapore. Over 20, he was telling me the other day. Over 20. It's another model, okay? And they find each, and they make money. It's another model, okay? So let's be aware of that. Different geographies, different histories bring different solutions, and there's no one size fits all. So what is ahead of us? Between the clash of giants, as in the US, you know, big vertically integrated dominant operators threatened by other so-called over-the-tops between the market shakeout that I described in Asia-Pacific, and where is Europe between a sort of survivor consolidation with revenue decline, industry loss of confidence, necessary consolidation of telcos, or sort of generative bazaar, each country going its own way, and scattered initiatives with trying to share passive infrastructure, deciding that no, we cannot afford to have a platform competition everywhere, so we should envisage other models, and we should envisage active infrastructure competition on top of common passive layers, and all the directives that head towards facilitating this passive sharing are welcome. So we must not forget there's a paradox in our industry. We're always whining, but it's rapidly evolving. The world has changed in the past 5 years more rapidly than in the last 25 years. I mean, the smartphone is the innovation in the history of mankind that had the biggest penetration rate. It took 18 months to reach the same penetration that it took 15 years to color TV. Mustn't forget this. We used to have 800 connected devices per square kilometer some 5 or 6 years ago. In 10 years, we will have 13,000, 20,000. Everything will be connected per square kilometer. I mean, so that brings around huge investment needs, yes. And our topic, our industry's topic, and what we saw at the EU roundtable some years ago when we tried to work with the Commission to find ways out of the crisis, is we have to find ways to attract these long-term infrastructure investments. Because, yes, we must not be afraid to say that our industry is capital intensive, needs infrastructure funds, but they do not consider our sector, because they see it as this vertical integration that they see it is a limit. They see the swirl of technologies, they do not understand the business models, and what we need to do, especially what strong and rapidly developing countries have understood, is that they need to attract these long-term infrastructure funds. That they rank our sector 10th after railroads, railways, sewage, energy, and that's why. Because the telecom model, especially in fiber backbones, is a layered model. And the passive infrastructure, which is 80% of the cost, has nothing to do with the active which is 5-10 years, which enjoys the swirl of technology. Unfortunately, it's only 15% from my company, which is present on this layer. And then you have the Googles of this world, which is the third layer. Again, another business model. And each layer has a very different financial profile and needs to be addressed adequately. And the technology, we're heading towards what you call network function virtualization, software-defined networks, which increases this tendency to make a difference between these three layers. And the first layer, we're just on the verge of releasing the DWN PON, which is one wavelength per service provider, service operator. What is that? Passive sharing, active sharing? It's virtually, you know, and there's absolutely no interest to roll out in parallel, even in some of the territories in Europe, 2 or 3 parallel platform networks, passive networks, because you can easily have differentiation in service and deep differentiation by allocating differently this wavelength. And then on the active layer, with our software-defined network, I mean, you can have IP stream, Ethernet level 2, IP level 3, and everything, differentiation, allocation, intelligently defined quality of service, and will be absolutely accessible at this layer, and without the constraint of sharing the first layer. And then, of course, you always have the last layer. So I just wanted to, I have not time to develop further, but to let you know that we must be a little forward-looking, and regulation should not ignore that technological fundamental changes might radically change the nature of our debates, the good old debates, platform competition, infrastructure competition versus service competition. We're heading towards a world where this will no longer make real sense. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Gabriel. Chris, if you're ready. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased once again to address this prestigious audience of international regulators. I had the opportunity and the honour to address you last year in London, and I think this is truly a unique forum comprising global regulators, and we really enjoy the opportunity to address you. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about drivers of consolidation, some of our experience with recent merger control cases, and also give you some reflections on the scope of ex-ante sector-specific regulation that is affecting the cable sector at the moment. And I hope also to give some constructive suggestions for reform of both ex-ante regulation and merger control. And I think as a pan-European operator and a long-term investor in cable, we are truly investing in infrastructure which has a sustainable future, both here in Europe and in elsewhere. And we are building scale in market so we can compete more effectively long-term. But to turn to some of the key facts of the company, we've grown significantly in the last 5 years from an asset base which was distributed across the globe to a focus very much on Western and Central European assets. We now cover 24.5 million customers in Europe, and we're also very active in the MVNO space with over 4 million mobile customers. We have been a beneficiary of the MVNO remedies both in Ireland and in Austria, which Sophie's team have been working on. And we're investing, looking forward, into content assets. So this is a short overview of where we are, and we really feel as a pan-European challenger in infrastructure, we can create a competitive response from others. So what are some of the drivers of consolidation in Europe? Well, as Sophie rightly pointed out, we need scale as a European industry in order to compete more effectively with our major competitors in Europe, the telecom incumbents. but also globally with over-the-top operators. So building scale has been our first priority. It allows us to more efficiently invest and create new services for which increasing demand we see in the market. We're not the only ones along this path, clearly. Telecom incumbents, mobile operators are all working to consolidate the market quickly. There's also a strong tendency toward cross-infrastructure deals, with cable operators buying mobile and mobile investing in cable. And we think this is evidence of the need to compete on both mobile and fixed data, and also evidence of the infrastructure competition model working effectively. In short, we think consolidation helps us compete more effectively, but long term, we think it's really about us being able to compete on a global scale. Turning to some observations on ex-ante regulation, on telecoms regulation. We've had a lot of experience over the last 10 years with ex-ante regulation. We've had different approaches. We've had a very intense regulatory intervention in the early 2000s in the Netherlands, and this slide talks to that experience and the evolution of that experience in the Netherlands. Over time, Opta, now ACM, saw more competition in the market and reduced the intervention. But at the same time, our regulators in Belgium increased the scope and scale of regulation. We've had very different approaches for ex-ante in the markets where we invest. The UK, Germany, Austria, Switzerland and Poland, all markets where we're present, have regulated us in a very light touch way, despite largely comparable market circumstances to Belgium and the Netherlands. We think ex-ante regulation built on competition law has worked very well. At first it was very prescriptive, but now it's a lot more flexible. I think the best example of this is the review of the list of relevant markets for telecom access regulation. And this has been a great force for reducing regulation as competition comes on stream. It also sets criteria for the introduction of new regulation, and this can only happen when a market does not tend toward competition, there are significant barriers to entry, and competition law is insufficient to address the problem. And we think these criteria are increasingly not met in Europe. So we would caution regulators looking to the future that restraint and forbearance are the real future-proof regulatory principles, in particular in markets where technological change happens very, very quickly, and companies such as WhatsApp and Netflix change market relationships and market structures overnight. We would also encourage regulators to think more long-term about how they assess effective competition in the market. We've been very focused on price and lowering prices as the right metric to assess competition. Maybe we now need to turn to some new principles around innovation and investment, as we think these are the essential additional metrics by which effective competition can be measured in the future. Turning briefly to merger control. As you can see, we've had a lot of experience in this space over the last 10 years. The cases we've been involved in and the transactions that we have proposed have become larger and more complex over time. Most importantly, in ranking, we've acquired a majority stake and now a control of Telenet. We've also invested in Poland through Asta, Unity Media and Kabel Baden-Württemberg in 2011, and then Virgin Media in 2013, and Ziggo in 2014, which is still subject to merger clearance. We've also been involved in a number of mobile mergers, of which I've already mentioned. And over time, we're now investing more vertically in the content production chain. And together with Discovery Networks, we've invested in a company called All3Media, and we're also investing in Channel 4 and 5 of Diviva in Belgium. We have intense experience of the complexity of market definition and geographic market definition in all of these deals. We've often faced very difficult and mutually and situations where regulators and ourselves mutually misunderstand how to define markets. In Poland, we faced a product market, a geographic market, which was down to the street level, street by street. In Germany, the debate focused very much on the definition of an analog signal supply to housing associations as the right product market. These are all complex discussions, and because of that, some of them are still pending. And because of that, we're big believers in the strength of the role that the European Commission can take in enforcing and guiding harmonisation across all these different markets in cable consolidation cases. Over the years, the team in Brussels has accumulated a great deal of expertise, and we really feel that in order to serve our investors and our shareholders best, we need proportionality, consistency and legal certainty from the merger control decisions that are handed down, and we think DG Comp is best placed to do this. We also think all regulators and competition authorities should have a willingness to recognise and adapt to technological change. So the European Commission is an incredibly important force for harmonisation, but they should not be the only force for harmonisation. We think both BEREC in the telecom sector field and the ECN, the European Competition Network, for ex post supervision of mergers, are great forces to encourage this harmonisation of views. But my final observations would be with regard to sector regulation. We think a closer alignment and even eventual merging of sector regulation and competition supervision is needed. ACM, the Dutch merged authority, has led the way in this. They have brought their telecoms regulator and the competition authority together, and we think this has many benefits. It allows expertise of a particular sector to be accommodated in-house. But it must be clear, both to market parties and to the converged regulator, what objectives are being pursued. And there must be clear Chinese rules between the different elements of a converged regulator in order for us to interact with them most effectively. So we think ACM is something of a leader in this area, and there may be food for thought for other regulators moving forward. So I thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to take questions in the Q&A afterwards.
Good morning. You must be exhausted by now. I'm the fifth speaker. A lot of what I wanted to say is already covered, so I really try to cut it short. First of all, thanks for accepting me as a replacement speaker for Bruce Gottlieb of SoftBank. He couldn't do it, he regrets it. He says hello to all of you and promises to be here next time. While I'm not an expert on US regulatory topics, I'm following what's happening there with the mega mergers, and I find it particularly interesting to compare the approach of the US versus the European approach to cope with convergence. What is certainly true for the US and the EU, the wave of convergence has not caught the regulatory analysis. The analysis, and in particular the market definition, remains unchanged while we are facing a tsunami of developments in technology. And why is that so? I mean, regulators tend to look backwards. We have heard that before. Regulators are lawyers. You look to precedents, and precedents are always in the past and not in the future. So we may have to consider taking a little bit away of competence from lawyers. I'm a lawyer too, but so don't blame me for that. In Germany, we have a discussion of more economic approach to competition law, competition analysis. And more recently, we have a new discussion about a more technology-driven approach of competition analysis. So I think you need technicians, you need experts in internet to help lawyers to understand where convergence is going. I think the most obvious example of the lack of pace of the regulatory approach is the distinction between linear and nonlinear services. I mean, video consumption is now not distinguishing anymore between linear and nonlinear, and I think regulators should realize that market distinctions are blurring. While I'm firmly a believer of that, the German regulator and the EU regulator still distinguish between pay TV and free TV, between public broadcasting and private broadcasting, certainly between video on demand and linear TV. So there are lots of subsegments and markets that drive the competition analysis, and I think that needs to be changed. Even print and TV, I mean, both is content that is delivered over the internet, requires a more unified approach. And then, last not least, the cable market. I mean, you've heard this from Chris. I mean, the way the German regulator, for example, looks at cable as an isolated infrastructure in a world where broadband is developing and you have a broad IP market of mobile and fixed net. I think you cannot single out cable anymore, the way the German regulators are doing this at the moment. And I think the EU Commission has also not moved on that point in the recent decisions. Interestingly, the incumbent prejudice, and we've discussed this, that the US approach on consolidation is always more liberal than the one of the EU or its member states, has proven incorrect recently. This is at least true for the prominent cases of the Sprint and T-Mobile combination, which was not a case, I have to say. It was basically abandoned before it could become a case in front of the regulators, but there were very harsh statements from the DOJ and the FTC on the one hand and the FCC on the other hand, so that it appears to be without any chance to try to go for that. I mean, I've just quoted two statements here, and I mean, they're very clear. For national wireless providers is good for American consumers. Sprint now has an opportunity to focus on their efforts on robust competition. That was the comment of Tom Wheeler after the merger plan was abandoned. And a similar one from the DOJ Deputy Attorney General. It remains to be seen how the US regulators will address the mega mergers that are now being reviewed, like Comcast, Time Warner, and AT&T DirecTV. I think those will give them a chance to pave the way for consolidation and to also address what convergence is about. Well, we are in Austria today, and we have heard about Austria. Just give you the comment of Mr. Almunia on what Michael Jungblut just said. He noted that what we can observe in Austria these days is not satisfactory. And he addresses the price increases that have been discussed. I mean, there are numerous reasons, but Almunia admitted a mistake that no upfront remedies were imposed on this 4-to-3 merger. We've heard that in other countries, Germany and Ireland, the EU Commission has changed the approach and has imposed those kinds of upfront remedies. And I don't want to repeat what we've heard about this. I think the key question for all of us, and I'd like your views on them, will consolidation enhance investments in broadband infrastructure? I mean, this is what the parties in merger cases always suggest to regulators. They say, look, we cannot invest if you do not allow us to consolidate. So what do you think? I mean, please raise your hands. Do you think consolidation will result in enhanced investments in broadband infrastructure? Who believes that? Okay.
Horizontal or vertical?
Horizontal. Let's start with horizontal consolidation, 4-to-3 mergers. Okay. Who is against that assumption? There were more in favor. Good. Second question, and that's the other key question in these 4-to-3 mergers. Will consolidation drive price levels up or down? Okay. Who's for up? Okay. Who thinks prices will go down? No one. Okay. Well, I really look forward to the discussion. Yeah? Okay, but I think these are the key questions. You can really boil down any 4-to-3 merger case or other horizontal merger cases to those questions. Well, I had one more, and that is about remedies. Also the different approach in the US and Europe. William Baer in January said, in horizontal mergers, the strategy seems to be to eliminate a big rival while proposing a remedy that allows for a small rival or new entrant with limited resources to nip at the heels of the few remaining big players. So that's a clear statement. And we'll see whether Drillisch in Germany will be able to nip at the heels of the 3 remaining players. Drillisch, by the way, is the upfront MVNO that was selected by the Commission. Oh, not by the Commission, by Telefonica, but approved by the Commission. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Almunia takes a different approach. The remedies to which Telefonica commits ensure that the acquisition of E+ will not harm competition in the German telecoms market. Consumers will continue to enjoy the benefits of a competitive market. It's the same kind of case with 2 different regulatory approaches. I think enough room for discussion here. So, what is the outlook for consolidation in Europe? Recent statements by Mr. Almunia. Easing competition rules to facilitate consolidation is not a solution. Full stop. And the new commissioner for competition, this future commissioner, Margrethe Vestager, the lady on the picture, has defended herself in front of the European Parliament last week and made a very good appearance there, very strong regulatory approach. Believes that European champions are not, should not be the result of a reduction of competition. Because if you reduce competition, you will not be a champion globally. Yeah? You need to fight in your own market and to be toughened by competition in order to become a strong global competitor. That's what she said, and I think that was very convincing. So, you see these statements, and we'll see whether she will actually do what she presented in front of the Parliament, and we'll see how this will impact consolidation in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Now we're going to launch into the question or discussion session. But before we do that, I've seen a first hand up. I have a little observation, and I'd like to address that observation to Sophie. The argument has always been made that competition has been a disincentive to operators to invest more in their networks because they're too busy competing against each other and all of that. And that obviously has provided the notion for why consolidation, which would mean that you have a bigger player, a larger scale player, and then needing to invest more in an upgraded network and all of that is the way to go. But interestingly, if we take the example with E+ and Telefonica, you notice that you consolidate, and as part of the remedies or the condition for approval, the merged network has to cede 30% of their spectrum of the combined network to a new operator coming in. So then it gives you the impression what you're consolidating only to compete. So then what really is the rationale for that? I don't know whether you get the idea of what I'm trying to put across. Because the whole point of consolidation is to eliminate or limit competition in the first place. So you do that by consolidating, but then require that they cede spectrum to a new entrant. Maybe you can address that confusion in my mind.
Sure. Just to go back to a bit of the basics and where the situation comes from. We've actually heard this morning as well that, competition drives investment. And, the example was taken about, situation in the fixed sector, where there's a cable operator, you see, other operators, rolling out fiber. Because, so, I think the picture is more complicated than, there's no simple answer to that. I think looking at the mobile merger specifically and looking at the facts of each cases that were brought to us, what we did see is that, there is this generic claim that is made and comes in different forms. The operators have brought forward, efficiency claims in, different forms. In Ireland, it was more like a generic claim of we need more cash flow with a bigger customer base, we'll have more cash flow, and we will use that money to invest. In Germany, this was made, there's going to be a better network. Yes, consumers might end up paying more, but they'll get more for their money, and there will be three, better networks. And what, we looked at is that actually, I'm not sure the answer has been fully answered at this point in time with all the different cases we've reviewed. What we did see and that we do see is that regardless of consolidation, because it's a dynamic and innovative industry. There are investment cycles. Operators are investing, and they have different investment strategies as well. Some operators spend a lot of money on spectrum, and then because actually also sites can be, can decide to invest in the, less expensive spectrum of 1800 for 4G and then roll out more sites. There are different strategies, but, we've seen that operators already absent the mergers are investing. And we've not, at this point in time, we remain skeptical that larger operators invest more than, smaller operators, or that a larger revenues translate in more investment. What we do see, and it's true, consolidation can, save costs. The same way as some network sharing, arrangements can, because of course there's elimination of some duplications. There is, from the physics of the networks as well, there might be also possibility to do more with the same, or do more with less. But I think, and this is where we step in, is that what we're trying to achieve is that, have your cake and eat it. That the operators are able to do what they want or they feel that they need, but at the same time preserve the interest of consumers, which actually unfortunately we don't hear much in this debate because it's a retail market. So it's atomistic. We don't send questionnaires to consumers, and this is something we might consider in future cases. Designing customer service that is being done in other things. And for instance, in the German case, I mean, one of the outcomes of the merger was possibly eliminating choice at the lower end of the market, which, was maybe important for consumers because they were already, good networks with a similar rollout. So, I mean, consumers then have the choice, how much do you want to pay for what service? And, is this, are they being forced to pay more for something that they may not want? I mean, it's a complicated question. So I think what we're trying to do with the remedies is, having, a new entrant that replicates or maintains a type of pressure that, is eliminated with the merger. And it's very fact-specific. So the spectrum, I mean, I think the outcome of these mergers, it's not a new entrant, a new mobile network operator. It's a new entrant on retail competition. So in terms of the networks, the consolidation of the networks, it has happened. I mean, that's not a condition. I mean, it's leaving the door open for possibly, some spectrum because of the barriers to entry that exist. So depending on, the market evolution and what happens, maybe, this MVNO or, might consider that it's better off, integrating and then becoming a full-blown, mobile network operators. And there are also other options. You can consider network sharing deals. You can consider, other ways of also rolling out networks cheap. So, I mean, this is sort of where we are in the debate.
Thank you. Any comment? All right, so we'll go to the floor, and I think we'll start with the gentleman. We'll come to you. And then. Oh, no, he had his hand up first.
Actually, my question is very much following on the chairman's point. Cass Calba International. I think the chairman has hit the nail on the head. And I was the only one who raised my hand when you asked if consolidation would lower prices. And I said, yes, with a proviso. And the proviso, let me try to explain the rationale, is that you don't eliminate the greater spectrum that the combined entity has. Okay? Because if you give them that, if they retain the extra spectrum, they have a huge incentive to take advantage of that and to either make more data services available or reduce price or some combination of the two. And yet there's this tradition among regulators, and I don't want to put the EC on the spot here because the other regulators are doing it also, of eliminating the spectrum advantage that the new consolidated entity has. The two reasons for that, I think, are A, you really don't believe that the extra spectrum will have a competitive effect, or you really are trying to protect competition but not disruptive competition. Because I think that if you allow that extra spectrum, you have the basis, at least short term, for disruptive competition. And in the long term, it forces the other operators to either invest in more spectrum in the next auction or however the spectrum is given out, or to invest in a denser network with existing spectrum so they can use it more efficiently through smaller cells, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, in this whole discussion, until the chairman brought up this point, the word spectrum was not mentioned. I mean, yes, there are future technology issues, but in the meantime, spectrum is a very integral part of competition in any wireless business, and yet the regulators are reducing it in the name officially of protecting, ensuring competition, and yet it potentially reduces the biggest incentive to greater competition, which is a spectrum advantage. And then the others have to respond through investment, through lowering of prices, et cetera. I hope that at least clarifies the idea that spectrum is important and that perhaps we shouldn't be consolidating the spectrum as we consolidate the operators.
Yeah, hi, Sumit Sharma from Auxera. And I think my questions relate to the prospective market definition for mobile mergers. I think the first point was mentioned by Michael as well. With the introduction of roaming like at home, do you see a role for competitive constraint from outside national markets? The second is net neutrality regulations and how that relates to product definition. I mean, so you have unfettered access for someone like Skype to mobile networks. So there will be competition at the service level. And my final comment was related to effects. Whenever the Commission looks at effects, they look at prices. And in a simple modeling exercise, prices always will increase. But to what extent do we need to modify that to take into account that consumers are using different products and services? So we go from voice to data, from 600 minutes to unlimited minutes, and changing usage. How do you capture that when you do a review? Thank you.
So we'll take a final one, then yeah, Bob.
Cisco. The reason I asked the question, right, in response to, horizontal, I said horizontal or vertical, because in terms of some of the issues in Europe on mobile, in order to be able to have pan-European competitors, right? So you need the competition, but fragmentation, right? Eliminates the ability to get scale, eliminates the ability also on issues of scale on handsets, the equipment, and the ability to roll out competitive pan-European services and internalize to the firm things like roaming, right? And so you get customers and you're able to compete. And so I think, it's a false choice to talk about either consolidation or competition. There's this level of having, enough competition to get benefits, but fragmentation, I think, is very counterproductive. This goes to some of the things that, Gabrielle has been talking about for a long time.
Right, okay, before Fabio comes in, Gabrielle, you had a response or comment?
No, I had just a comment on what was said. Yeah, we didn't mention spectrum because it's not a tool, unfortunately, in the hands of regulators. The biggest enemy of regulators is the finance minister. It's I can tell you it's the budget of the states that see the sector with deep pockets. So of course it's a big element of the end pricing in mobile, which is not in the hand of competition. It's in the hand of another part of the state, and it's something that countries that come up with auctions have to really think about. Second, yes, I agree that if you chunk out and you get the maximum of the value out of the spectrum by chunking it into little chunks of spectrum and pricing it very high, and then we also have to fight against this, because as this avoids, you get much more throughput, and all our technology studies show it. If you have a bigger chunk of spectrum, and if you even allow it in some areas where you have absolutely no economies of space to have 4 various networks in rural areas, for instance, if you allow operators to share, and the buzzword at the Mobile World Congress is infrastructure sharing, and sometimes even go further, we think of spectrum sharing by guaranteeing even some form of competition, even if you share the spectrum. And that's the technology and the forward-looking technology I was talking to on the fiber. We also have the forward-looking technologies on the mobile side that will allow for this cheap resource to be shared. And combine sharing and competition. But don't forget that the price of the spectrum is one big parameter that is not in the hand of regulators.
Fabio? Oh no, sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yes, this is Carlos Rodriguez with Telefónica. I have a question for Sophie. Actually, I think that your presentation was very telling in the sense of showing how national regulatory authorities and competition authorities are still very much focusing on network operators as the gatekeepers or the bottleneck of the ICT ecosystem. However, what we're seeing nowadays is a different situation with positions of dominance across the digital value chain, actually formidable positions of dominance in places such as searching or social networks or operating systems. And recently, DigiCom actually cleared another operation, which was the Facebook WhatsApp acquisition. And actually, after our operation in Germany, it's striking to see how the acquisition of ePlus by Telefónica, a 9 billion euro operation, got this thorough examination that you described, a very detailed set of remedies, and an acquisition of Facebook WhatsApp, which is a $19 billion operation, gets not even into a deep investigation or a deep follow-up by DigiComp. So there are many reasons potentially for that and many technical arguments. Potentially our perception of the network effects associated to this operation are different than the ones that the ECOM had. To us, it's difficult to understand how a user that belongs to a platform that gathers roughly one third of the world population may have incentives to switch to another platform. But beyond that, my question relates more to privacy issues, because actually I noticed with great interest the information and the report that the Data Protection Supervisor Authority produced in terms of how to measure impact on privacy of this sort of operations, where consumer welfare may be impacted from a different perspective than price, because actually the price for the services that these sort of companies offer is zero. And actually the response by DigiCom was that privacy is not actually within their remit or within the box of tools that you usually use in this kind of cases. And the question, the final question is, does DigiCom have the right tools to approach these sort of new operations that appear in other layers of the value chain and lead to these macro positions of dominance?
Okay, so once you prepare that, Fabio.
Every time we discuss competition versus investment versus the development of the sector, I experience a big frustration that I tend to blame on the difference of culture between lawyers and economists. Maybe there could be other explanations. If we maintain the discussion at the level of general principles, is competition good? We get nowhere. Who could be against competition? Who doesn't know that in the long term, competition is good for investment, that lower prices are good, that technical progress is what we need? The real question that we should be discussing here is how competition policy has been applied to the specific case of the telecom sector, which has some specific characteristics that don't exist in other sectors, and certain specific features of regulation as it has been applied to the sector. There may be more factors, but I want just to mention two. The telecom sector is characterized by huge initial investments and very low variable cost. So you can theoretically imagine that you might be getting in situations where prices become so low that they will not justify further investment, and lowering of the prices further is not even in the interest of consumers in the long term. Extreme case, but it's theoretically possible. The other point that is specific of the telecom sector is that competition clearly gives an advantage to whoever invests. But practice of the regulators many times has been to restrain the company that is making the investment, not allowing it to reap the benefits of the investment until everybody else in the sector is able to replicate exactly the product that the company wants to bring to the market. So that is something that has a justification, but clearly diverges very much from the basic naive idea that we have about competition. So please apply your comments to the specific case of the telecom sector and how competition policy has been applied until now in this sector. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think my intervention will be to some extent linked to what Fabio has just said. When you have listened to the very good interventions of this panel, you have tried in different manners to give your answer to the headline of the session, Consolidation and Competition, what is best for public interest. What is the public interest? We all want a flourishing digital economy. We want broadband for all, low prices, mobile coverage everywhere, and so on and so forth. New services, new innovative services. But when I have listened to your interventions, they have circled all the time around telecom regulation, competition regulation, merger control, which are important. But could you imagine that there are other tools in the toolbox in this particular area of telecoms? I would like to propose one particular means which you have not touched upon, and I'll give you a couple of examples, and then I want to listen to your reaction to my examples. My idea is that you should be much more concerned about the enormous power vested in government purchasing power at all levels. Let me give you a couple of examples. In my country, Denmark, we have very good mobile coverage in most of the country. But there are areas in the west of Denmark where mobile coverage is very poor. What is an appropriate means to propose? Competition has not given coverage. Is it likely that competition will do this in the future? No, it is not. Consumers are hopping around from operator to operator. There's no merit in investing at all. What could the local government do? The local government could arrange a public tender for mobile communications to this particular local government, requiring that the winner in the public tender install masts, establish an infrastructure giving complete mobile coverage, say within a 3 or 5 year period. This would be best for the public interest. You will have full mobile coverage. There would be economy for the winning party. You would have full competition getting the contract with the local government. This is one example. Another example, which is likely to cover the public interest in rolling out broadband, would be the emerging interest in telemedicine. You could imagine exactly the same formula applied there. The government could arrange a public tender for providing widespread mobile broadband coverage all over the country, allowing for telemedicine and also for operating telemedicine. This would be completely in accordance with all competition regulation, and it would serve the public interest in broadband. I would like to hear your views on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's quite a number of them. But the first one from Rodriguez to Sophie, you deal with that, then I'll come to Gabriel, and then I'll call for general comments on the submissions made by Fabio, and hopefully we'll do a last one. And good. Yeah.
I actually counted a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I mean, the first one, going back, trying to be back on the spectrum point, I think it's actually inaccurate that we have forced, that the merged entity has not been able to retain its spectrum. I mean, the outcome of the last mergers reviews were actually that the merged entity had more spectrum. And actually, those who were most vocal about it were the competitors of the merged entity. But we haven't found, that this was bad in itself. And there again, I mean, the spectrum caps are typically, in the auctions or to set aside for a new entrant. But it's a complex question, the spectrum. And I think views diverge as to some spectrum asymmetry can be good for competition and consumers, or, it's not, views diverge quite a lot. I don't know, do you want us to address also roaming for market definition or the Facebook WhatsApp? Sure. So Facebook WhatsApp, they're typically, this was a merger of over-the-top players. And I mean, these over-the-top players, in the case of Facebook, Facebook is a well-known social network, and it also operates Facebook Messenger. And Facebook Messenger, allows over-the-top communication, so instant messaging, sharing of pictures, and also voice over IP is, a future application. WhatsApp does the same. WhatsApp has been a very successful application, less so in the United States, but definitely, in Latin America or in Europe. So there, what we looked at, I mean, the main overlap that we looked at, because we looked at the market definition. So from the telecom operators companies, I mean, the service it's on top. So, you need data connectivity to be able to use the services of these operators. So it's not a full substitute. What it's a substitute to is mobile. It's text messaging and voice. I mean, it's true that, the penetration of these apps has eroded telecoms regulator revenues, but, an operator, a customer, a user of WhatsApp cannot do away, necessarily fully. It needs internet connectivity, whether fixed or mobile, or some form of internet connectivity. We looked at the overlap between, the companies for these messaging applications, and what we found that, we did look at the market dynamics, and this is actually also a market that is very dynamic. There are lots of new players that have come in. WhatsApp started in 2009, Line started in 2011, so there are constantly new players coming. And what we found is that in terms of barriers to entry, I mean, there are not very many barriers to entry in typical terms. I mean, these operators do not control the platform. I mean, in the case of Facebook, Google is different, of course, but they don't control the operating system on which, the application is running. Generally, it's a software piece that's easy to download for consumers. I mean, there's multi-homing, so many consumers actually use more, 2, 3, 4 sometimes of these applications and communicate. We did look at the network effects because indeed, these services, their value increases by, the number of users because you use them to communicate. But we had some elements, where we found that the parties were not close competitors there. I mean, that their products were positioned a little bit differently, and so the addition of the two would not really, restrict that. And we found that the network effects, as such, would not lead to future problems in the market. And so on the basis of all of this, the decision was taken that on the basis of the facts that we had, we were going to clear this merger. And the decision was adopted just last Friday.
Thank you. Thanks, Sophie. Gabriel?
No, I just wanted to the point of that you raised, Jürgen. This model exists in Europe. In the country I know best, in France, I mean, you have 150 local authorities that not only issued RFPs for their own needs, because on a territory, approximately the needs of the public community is 1/3 between the schools, the hospitals, the rest, and the businesses, and if you compare everything. But you have to be a little more prescriptive. You go further. You say, I will co-invest in a network that will cover and will be open according to this wholesale catalog. So we have done it in France through the Caisse de dépôt investment. I was leading that, and it's now very much looked by a lot of African governments. Sort of PPP, and you share the first layer, especially the passive layer, and then you open up to competition on top. So it's absolutely this model. You have an engagement, and the World Bank is pushing also this model. An engagement of investment, especially in the passive layer, against an engagement of coverage, of putting, of course, the government commits to putting its own government needs on it, public safety, education, health, and the rest, and then of opening up to competition according to a certain wholesale catalog. So the model that you're imagining does exist.
Switch is on?
I think it works like that.
Okay. Well, just to your point, in Germany we have the same kind of tender procedures to cover white spots. Unfortunately, the auction design often is such that big players are favored over smaller and medium-sized players. So Deutsche Telekom, which is, as you know, still a state-controlled entity, gets like 60-80% of all the tenders, and then rolls out copper and not fiber, which is not the real idea of all that. And one other remark on spectrum. I think no one has mentioned that in Germany there was an LTE auction in 2010 where Telefonica and E-Plus were both involved, and E-Plus did not get any spectrum on LTE. And after that auction, or even when the auction design was published, many analysts and commentaries said, what you're doing here is you force the companies to consolidate. I mean, you reduce the spectrum artificially in order to maximize profits for the German government, but you, in the end, the consumer will pay the bill if the prices go up. I think that was the comment, and it has been forgotten and it has not been mentioned today, but spectrum is clearly very, very important, but it's not in the hand of the regulators.
Yeah, very quickly, I know time's running out. Well, first of all, I think I agree with Fabio's comments that I think each and every case really needs to be examined quite carefully and be specific about it. That's why I had a difficulty in raising my hands when you asked the question whether consolidation leads to investments and whether there'll be prices. So let me, and also I think since Gabriel kindly mentioned about Singapore's case, I thought I would just use that as perhaps an example. We didn't coordinate, we didn't talk to each other, but the chart you show about different layers and different investment time frame is exactly what we went through. And my point is that actually, when we look at consolidation and looking at where we want prices to be most impacted, we have to consider investment profiles. What we did in Singapore is, therefore, we did structural separation of the optical fiber passive network because that's a long investment. We put in some government incentive with the requirement of achieving USO rollout time frame as well as bidding on prices. As a result of that, we went from 2 operators before, basically cable TV and ADSL, to more than 21 ultra high-speed broadband providers currently. Price of 1 gigabit in Singapore is $38. 50% of households Singapore has optical fiber. So I think my point is that you really have to look at the specifics, and I think the investment profile is a very key consideration, and I think that applies also in the mobile space.
Thank you very much. I think there was a question on roaming. Anyone from the left side of the house. And Michael?
Yeah, I try to answer that. I think you are, if I understood it correctly, it's if there is competition coming from third parties. The European Commission once had the idea of the local breakout issue, and now completely changed the strategy. Now it's going to be the abolishment of roaming. I mean, we all as operators have invested in the local breakout issue already, a few millions, and then it's changed again. So this obviously frustrates some financial funds, also investment. To my point of view, with the abolishment of roaming, it's done. I think we don't need third party whatever, it's done.
Well, it looks like we're standing between you and lunch now. We've gone beyond the allotted time for us. So I believe we can continue these discussions at lunch. And I would like to request you to join me in thanking this panel for a very excellent delivery. And feel free to approach any one of them if you still have any questions that wasn't satisfactorily dealt with at this session. So thank you very much.